director and producer, Jennifer McShane, and then our two principals, Ernest Stevens and Joe Smorrow. So let's start with Jennifer. Jennifer McShane is an independent filmmaker committed to using film to bridge understanding in situations where structural, cultural, or religious divisions typically keep people apart. Her most recent film, Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops, won the Jury Award for Empathy and Craft at the South by Southwest West in 2019 and is currently streaming on HBO. Jennifer spent nearly 5 years visiting Bedford Hills Correctional Facility to make her previous documentary, Mothers of Bedford, which reveals the impact of incarceration on jailed mothers and their children. Jennifer lives in Guilford, Connecticut with her family and rescue dog Finn. Welcome, Jennifer. Glad you're with us tonight.
Thank you
now,
so much.
Yes, thank you. And I want to now introduce Ernest Stevens, who talked about vinyl records, the old LPs, and also talked about egg whites and turkey bacon. And I loved it, Ernest. And it goes by Ernie. And he served as a police officer for over 28 years, recently retired from the San Antonio Police Department, where he served for 25 and a half years. Stevens was a founding member of the San Antonio Police Department Mental Health Unit. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Stevens has been featured on Nightline, NBC's A Different Kind of Force, and the Emmy Award-winning HBO documentary, Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops. Ernie is currently working as the Crisis and Resiliency Specialist at Southwest Texas Regional Advisory Council, known as STRAC. Now, Joe, let's introduce Joe. And we'll start out, Joe. NAMI always wants to acknowledge our veterans and thank them for their service. So let me start out there as begin to do your introduction. Thank you for your service and appreciate it very much. So Joe is a decorated combat veteran from the United States Marine Corps. He honorably served 2 tours to Afghanistan and Iraq with the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. In 2005, he joined the San Antonio Police Department, where he became one of the original members of the SAPD's mental health unit, which Smorrow helped to grow into a nationally recognized best practices policing unit, excuse me. In addition to being one of the main subjects in the HBO documentary, Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops, Smorrow has been featured in multiple media outlets, including the TED Talk, I See You. He is the founder and CEO of Solution Point Plus, a national training and consulting firm that focuses on cultivating mental wellness to maximize human capital and promote safety within organizations. So thank you all for being here on this evening and being with NAMI. You know, we have a saying, and this is NAMI's core from the very beginning about caring. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's so interesting to see how you guys can demonstrate that in your work in terms of demonstrating care before policing. So it's wonderful to see that. And I just want to thank you on behalf of NAMI and all of the participants here that are listening. Many of them would love to thank you as well. So Jennifer, I'd love to start out by asking you a question. And by the way, audience, I'll just ask a couple of leading in questions, and then we'll go to your questions. But so hang in there with us. So Jennifer, what was the inspiration for this film? Very interesting about your other body of work, your documentary. So what led you to this one?
A couple of things, which is usually the case with these kind of projects. I found out specifically about the work in San Antonio because I read a fabulous article written by a friend, coincidentally, about the work happening generally in San Antonio, and the mental health unit was part of that. But I think the backstory, why it was percolating and why that resonated with me so much is when I made Mothers of Bedford, I followed families and women incarcerated at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York State, a maximum security prison, for about 4 years. And the film is about parenting and mothering and how to keep that connection with your family during this situation. And that's what the film was about. But what became very painfully obvious to me while I was making that film was the connection between mental health, crisis, trauma, all these things with why people ended up there. And either it brought them there, or they were not getting treated. There was just so many intersections between those topics, but that film didn't really address it because of the women I was following. But it was kind of always percolating in the back of my head. So when I learned about what was happening in San Antonio, it really spoke to me. And I went out and spent some time without my camera and was very moved by what I was seeing. And, I say this a lot when I talk about the film, it's about mental health and policing, but it's really about human connection. It's how we treat each other. It's what you just said about care, how we show we care. And we need to kind of infuse as many of our things in society with that. And so this was a chance for me to tell that story.
Thank you. And as you told the story, Jennifer, and as you're looking through the lens of your camera and actually the producer and the executive producer, but you're seeing some things. Were there any aha moments for you? Were there any unique things that you saw that kind of still resonate with you today?
Yeah, lots of things. Well, first of all, incredibly cramped, the most cramped space. It was basically, we filmed 300 hours, most of it in a police car. So we had to be creative. But what really, really stuck with me was the approach. Every single call, and it didn't matter if we were in any part of the city, which is a large, large city. That the first thing was, hi, I'm Ernie. Hi, I'm Joe. How can we help you? That was the absolute first thing. No uniform, which kind of immediately brought down the temperature. But the other thing that really struck me was that, and I think this is vital, I want every police department, every law enforcement, every first responder to have this kind of training. But if you don't have somewhere safe and appropriate to bring someone for care, you're really stuck. So like, that was clear to me that this is really a very important part of the puzzle that we're talking about, but our mental health needs to be improved, our facility where we're bringing people for help, that's part of it. So that was also a key thing. And I think just the fact that officer wellness is such an important key to this whole story. And I knew it intellectually when I went out there, but the more time I spent and I observed Ernie and Joe talking to other officers about their wellness, it became very clear to me that it had to be part of the story. And so that was kind of an aha moment, how that is really, officers showing up in a crisis are bringing their own crisis, their own mental health potentially to the situation. So that was really important for me to make sure to tell that story as well. So that was probably maybe the biggest aha.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I want to build on that last statement about officer wellness. And Joe, you mentioned in your TED Talk that 19 to 34% of law enforcement officers qualify for a disorder of post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. What have you seen since that? That was your 2018 TED Talk, and we're now in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you and happy International Women's Day to all the women. And I'm really grateful that you have us here, Dan. So I'm seeing that while that was a spectrum of 19 to 34%, I think the latest research is showing 35%, which I would agree with. I always thought that was a conservative range. I do believe it's 35%, and that's probably a low end. The reality is that policing nowadays they're really human beings that are saturated with human suffering. Officers are being asked to do more and more, and there's less and less support for the amount of work that they're being asked to do. And again, this is a cultural issue, though. This isn't a community problem that there's any blame to be passed. I think that the real change is going to have to happen from within. And I think that each agency is going to have to be responsible to prioritize the mental health and wellness of their officers. And I'm really excited that there are several agencies doing just that. And so sadly, we kind of sit back and we start to believe, I think, that we're doing okay because of insert whatever excuse. And if we're gauging success of our programs based on the fact that we haven't had a suicide within our agency, that's a problem. And we shouldn't just be looking at the suicide numbers as to the success of our programs. And this is precisely what we'll be presenting at next week in Atlanta. at IACP is about how we should be measuring behaviors through internal affairs investigations rather than just suicide numbers correlating to our mental health and wellness programs within each agency.
No, that's real leadership. So thank you for that, and appreciate that overview. And Ernie, I'd like to come to you and ask you a question in terms of advice for helping organizations like NAMI, state organizations and affiliates partner with law enforcement and public safety agencies on collaborative efforts for mental health. What are some best practices that you may even be sharing them at IACP next week, but you would certainly share them with anyone that wanted to know, here's how you get started, here's what to do, here's what not to do.
Right. And first of all, thank you so much for allowing us to be here and screening the film. As a former board member of NAMI here in San Antonio, man, it's like talking to family. It really is. I love what NAMI has done, not only for our community, but me personally as a person. They're always an organization that steps up and is willing to help. So on behalf of myself and my family, thank you so much for everybody here that's joined in us tonight with NAMI. But to your question, this year was particularly, I feel, critical because a lot of funds came in for ARPA money, for COVID relief money, and NAMI was one of the first ones that came to the table to try to get together and say, look, let's form a task force and let's meet with our county commissioners, our city council, and let's talk about what we can do to build programs for improvement, right? To help strengthen the systems of care in place. So really what it takes is partnering with NAMI reaching out, starting some of these task force, these Tiger teams, and keeping the conversation going. Because the result of that conversation that NAMI started here in San Antonio was the county commissioners here in Bath County just went ahead and approved a 5-year program to help collaborate between law enforcement, social work, and medical to respond to mental health crises. So this is beautiful, right? On a local level within the police department and training, we brought NAMI into every one of our trainings. And they had, I think, 3 different sessions, and then they would help us evaluate and give feedback on role plays as well. So they're critical in the infrastructure of the training, and they're critical for the infrastructure of the community that they serve. So again, my advice is get involved with them. If you're not a member, join. If you are a member, get involved. It's not like just going to church. Yeah, I go to church, but do you do anything beyond that, right? You got to get involved. So I appreciate what they've done here and what they continue to do.
Thank you very much for that. And this is a little sidebar, and audience just hang in there with me, but a number of people have said thank you to you and to Joe for your work in law enforcement, and it's very sincere here. So want to make sure that you all hear that. And Joe, you got a lot of kudos for acknowledging International Women's Day. So you just, for Ernie and I, we'll talk to you on the side in terms of how that made us feel that you stepped up so well on that one, big guy. So way to do that for us. So where I'm going now is on the 18,000 police commands in the United States. There's over 18,000 police commands in the United States, and we're talking about crisis intervention training. How is there a way to make it pervasive, and what's the right way going forward in terms of, you're going to be at IACP next week. I hope that you're going to be at NSA, National Sheriff's Association, because local sheriffs in counties like Bexar County, San Antonio, they run the jails. So, hopefully you're getting to both, and you've been to both multiple times. But is crisis intervention training, as I've seen, as one of your instruments? How do we make it more pervasive across police commands in the United States?
For me, it starts by actually mandating it. I think as long as we continue to leave it optional, you're going to have officers opting out. And I think that while we initially resisted it, when Chief McManus in San Antonio mandated that every officer was going to go through the training, as the instructors, we kind of pushed back saying, hey, this is a lot of work. That's going to take a long time. But we learned some really valuable lessons there. And I know that some people believe that it should be reserved for those that want to do it. But until we live in a world where police officers get to choose what call they respond to, they shouldn't have a choice on how trained they are. So I think it starts by first mandating it. Second, I think it starts by having a really, really honest look at your program. Sadly, I have seen some subpar crisis intervention training programs that exist. They really are about checking a box and being able to just say that we've reduced liability. Our officers have CIT training. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding as well about what CIT training actually is. I'm aware of some agencies that claim they have CIT training and they go through 2 days of training. So there's really not a firm grasp on what it actually is. And this is, again, no fault of CIT International. It's just there's a lot of watered down versions out there. Again, fortunately, this is my whole purpose now, is providing these programs. And one of the things I'll say too, Dan, and I'll end this because I could go on forever, is my opinion on this is a robust, sustainable CIT program is going to prioritize officer wellness, because every training that police officers get is heavily focused on better preparing them for the community. And please be patient with me on this, community. I believe that if you actually give an officer a training to create an introspective approach where they get to see what's going on within themselves, I believe that we have a lot of men within the police departments that are emotionally stunted, that lack emotional intelligence that is really required to do this job well. And I think if you have a good CIT program that's actually going to focus on those things, that's going to create a psychologically safe space so that officers can start to really look inward to focus on their own struggling, then they're going to realize the similarities they have with the people in the community they're responding to. And it's the fastest way to get them to see the community members as neighbors instead of the us versus them, or they're somehow less than us, whatever identifier they put on them. So when we start to, and I think CIT is a great vehicle because you're actually giving them a valuable skill set, but you can sneak in enough content in classes where it really starts to make them feel a certain kind of way. And again, I'm very fortunate. I've seen people on here from Iowa. We just landed a statewide contract to train all the cops in Iowa. We just, as of today, got the Illinois State Troopers. So now we're going to be doing all the Illinois State Troopers. Plus, we got the Federal Bureau of Prisons, because that corrections is something that is heavily forgotten about. We tend to not remember that they're a part of the first responder continuum. And so there's a lot that we're doing to address this and really go after it. But all of our training that we provide is starting with the individual in mind. It's not about the community first. They're going to be a benefactor as an end product, but we have to create more whole first responders first.
Thank you, Joe. And Ernie, I'll come to you in a second. But Joe, I want to follow-up question. There were two things that you said that coming from a law enforcement professional, it's taken in the right context. Coming from a mom or a family member, it could be taken wrong. You mentioned the men being emotionally stunted, and there was something else you mentioned. It was emotionally stunted. And what was the other thing you said?
This is a huge problem for me, Dan. As soon as I say something, it's gone.
Don't worry about it. Let's stay with that. What I want to go with is to you and Ernie as law enforcement professionals. Sometimes we as men, when you know, it's the other thing when we hear we have to talk. We get nervous when our significant other says we need to talk. So we also don't necessarily look in that mirror and deal with this from the standpoint of being emotionally stunted, if you will. So how can that be something where it's not not necessarily put in their face, but something that they can learn from and say, I'm okay and I'm better as a result of learning some things about myself. And because it doesn't have to be defend attack, it can be a win-win kind of a situation. How can that happen when it's only the two of you guys? Anybody want to take that one?
Yeah, and I'll talk about it for just a moment. And like Joe said, because this training is very decentralized and nothing is the same, it's very difficult really to hammer in the most foundational courses that you need in a CIT class. What's very foundational right now and what he's talking about is officer wellness and resiliency, right?
Yes.
Look at the numbers in 2019, bluehelp.org, 239 officers committed suicide, right? We're killing ourselves at a rate of 4 to 1 because we're just not as he mentioned before, emotionally intelligent enough to really understand, our emotions and keep those in check in order to also be able to self-regulate. I think one of the most foundational classes that Joe began to teach, which kind of caught on and now it's spread, is the adverse childhood experiences and really understanding the true essence of trauma, right? Trauma-informed care at an early age. Once we started to teach that to officers, they began to understand a little bit more about themselves and why they reacted to certain situations the way they did when faced with a traumatic event that was happening out in the field, right? So once you understand about trauma, it's not what happened to you, right? It's what happened inside of you. And once you understand that, you're better able to self-reflect and know, hey, this is a traumatic incident that I'm dealing with. I know that this goes back during an early childhood trauma. You understand the importance of therapy. You understand the importance of self-regulation, spiritual health, mental health, physical health, right? All these are emotional health. All these really bring that officer and the essence of health together to be able to produce the best product that you can to put on the street and respond to somebody that's in their own crisis that may not understand about trauma at an early age and trauma-informed care. So this conversation can go on and on, but I think when you look at the foundation, it all goes back to trauma. And then what do we know about it? And then what do we do with it?
Yeah, and I'll hold this for later, maybe put it in the parking lot. But I hope that you guys are replicating yourselves. We need Ernie and Joe's across the country, and even if there's some kind of way that you're adopting some other officers regionally to kind of be Ernie and Joe's across the country, it would be very helpful for us. I want to go to Jennifer right now and ask Jennifer a question. Jennifer, you mentioned about a place to go when someone is picked up. We just did something called Reimagine Crisis Response, and it's talking about 988, but it's 988 is in and of itself a new number that's going to go live in July of this year. But in the number itself is a tool and an instrument that's going to help us if we have a 24-hour crisis response line and trained crisis response counselors. Right. Then you have the mental health response team that can respond and hopefully de-escalate someone that's decompensating. And if not, they can de-escalate to the point of transporting. But to your point, you mentioned transporting to where? So I'd love to ask all three of you, in your experiences, have you seen that the where is a huge area of opportunity? From a brick and mortar, it seems to me that we don't have the where. There's not any place, crisis stabilization centers are few and far between, but I'd like to hear what you think of that. And then Ernie, I'm going to come back to you on adverse childhood experiences and talk about that for a second. Jennifer?
Yeah, I will definitely let Ernie and Joe respond to this about where to bring someone in crisis. But I will say that I was very struck by part of the reasons I wanted to film in San Antonio was there was less of a sense of everybody being in their silo. There was a real honest to goodness feeling that this was a community problem. We have a tendency, to look for who to blame when we're suffering in community or in family. And what I saw was a real ability for them to roll up their sleeves and work together. I'm from New York City where, police and fire often didn't get along. So I was very impressed with San Antonio. There was definitely this undercurrent of Sukasa, Mikasa, or Mikasa, Sukasa. And they got together, and something that I filmed a couple of times that never made it into the film because I had to cut it down. I had too much, but was the fact that they sat together once a month with private hospitals, public hospitals, sheriff's department, law enforcement, rehab, detox, everybody who was impacted in supporting or responding to people in crisis would sit around a table. And I'm not talking about an email thread. I'm talking about sitting around a table. And obviously the last 2 years have tough for COVID, but when I was filming, they were sitting around a table, rolling up their sleeves and listening. And I cannot say how important, that's kind of why I love what I do. I try to listen and try and kind of glean the most authentic as possible as I can story to tell. And what I was struck was there was a lot of listening, people listening to police officers about 20-hour waits in an ER, and vice versa. So they were kind of learning from each other instead of telling each other how to fix it. And it wasn't perfect. I'm not trying to say this is a perfect system. I'm just saying that I was struck by how they were working and approaching it as a village. And that's very much how I took my cue in terms of the film. I want the film to be kind of an immersive ride along where you're not being lectured. You're experiencing what so many people are experiencing, which is a loved one in crisis or a first responder trying to navigate this, maybe without the proper training. And by doing this kind of outreach, I have really been heartened by, there are Ernie and Joes around the country. There are not enough of them, but they're there. And they have one beautiful thing about bringing this film to so many communities and making it available to police departments and law enforcement, including jails in LA and other places, is that kind of these unicorns, these people who really believe there's a better way to do this, kind of surface. They find us, they see the film and they get it. And they say, I'm going to be an advocate for this. So I see the film as an invitation for someone to say, you know what, we can figure this out. It may not be exactly like San Antonio, but we can certainly move the needle in a better way. And I just want to quickly shout out to all the NAMI chapters who have already used the film in their communities, like in the most amazing way. I mean, literally, they were kind of ran out of the gate and have used it from Maine to Seattle to everywhere. It's just stunning, rural, urban, and they found ways to creatively make sense in their community and use the film to kind of hopefully get it to a better place, and also realize that law enforcement are also their clients. So it's been this kind of beautiful relationship, and it's been wonderful for me and very satisfying to see how they've used it. But I'll let the real experts talk now.
No. Thank you very much, Jennifer. So you mentioned listening, and four of our qualities are we listen, we lead, we advocate, and we educate. I would like to offer a fifth one in terms of NAMI. So I mentioned listen, lead, advocate, and educate. In addition, I want to add in learn. So that's one of those other. So you know, if you're really listening, you're learning. So that's one of the things. And to all of the NAMI chapters and the affiliates out there, excuse me, and the state organizations that have been and have shown Ernie and Joe, thank you, and hope you will continue to do it. So Ernie, I want to come to you about adverse childhood experiences. You mentioned ACEs, and that it resonates with me from this standpoint. A few years back, I visited several jails, including the Twin Towers in LA, and then Cook County, as well as Coconino County. And Joe, in Coconino County, the sheriff there had created a military pod because so many of our young veterans had returned. And he said, I'm not a mental health expert, but I believe all of these young military personnel have post-traumatic stress disorder. They all came back, and the ones that were in his jail, they had done something that had brought them in there, and he had built it out where Marines were in a Marine area because and then Coast Guard was there, Army was here, Air Force was here, but he says that there was a mentor that was the leader in each one of those. And because of their credo, they were helping each other with their mental health. So now I want to go back to adverse childhood experiences and what you've seen, Ernie, in your work with our young people. And where I'm going to go here is with this question to you. I was visiting the Cook County Jail for the third time. And at this visit, I started in the women's section. And then I was going over to the men's section that afternoon. So I interviewed some women. And as I was leaving, a woman said to me, "Are you going over to the men's section?" And I said I was. And she said, "Would you do me a favor?" And I said, "If I can, I will." She said, "Would you tell my son I said hello?" So we had two generations there. Where am I going with that is that young man that was there had some type of adverse childhood experiences that now has his legacy tied to his mother's, and they're in Cook County Jail together. What have you seen in terms of our young people and their adverse childhood experiences that resonates with you in this mental health work?
Right. So the study itself really looked at the gene transference, right, of physical health and things that could go wrong with you physically. But what they found was the transference was just as strong mentally as well, right? The higher your A score is, the higher the chance that you could be diagnosed with a mental health disorder or be suicidal. And what's the thing about trauma is you don't know what you don't know. So until you understand it, you're really at a disadvantage of how to deal with it, right? And I'll give you an example about this. And a lot of it is either self-shadowing or how people perceive or talk to you, right? I watched an interview with Dr. Mata, and he was interviewing a lady in a domestic violence relationship. And he asked her, like, what is it about this relationship that makes you feel so bad? And she goes, it's the way he talks to me. He calls me monster. And the doctor said, well, how does that make you feel? Well, I feel worthless and ashamed of myself. And then he said, well, what if I told you I liked your purple hair? And she laughed. And he goes, what's wrong? She goes, well, I'm laughing because I don't have purple hair. And then he goes, then why do you feel that way when he calls you monster? Right? So if you think about it, it's what are you willing to accept about yourself versus what do you understand about trauma and will push back on. So I think learning about ACEs it's fundamental now. I was blessed to be able to hear about the class and then watch it being taught. And then since then, taken multiple more classes and been able to have conversations and try to reach and connect with people a lot better now that I understand trauma from a standpoint. Because Joe and I, when we took the test, the A-score test, we're on total opposites of the spectrum, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to connect with somebody. We just have to be able to understand, right? And it comes down to empathy. So I love the question. Thank you for asking that.
You're very welcome. And I know you guys are on the opposite end of the spectrums because you offered him turkey bacon. So I know, we're trying to make this as engaging as possible. And one of the things I wanted to ask you also, Ernie and Joe, if you jump in on this, is that, Ernie, and as we introduced you, we mentioned that you've been a police officer over 28 years and that you were a founding member of the mental health unit there. So when did the mental health unit, San Antonio, Bexar County, when did it start? And can you walk us back in terms of how, as a founding member, how did you get Bexar County, the San Antonio Police, to say we're going to do this? And what are the early lessons from that adoption of you being on the, when did it start and what are your early lessons?
Yeah, so I love it, and I'll condense it because I want to give everybody else a chance to talk. But so we actually started the unit December 1st of 2008. But
oh, we may have lost Ernie.
Okay, training in 2003. We got the unit started in 2008. It had nothing really to do with me. I had been advocating for a unit, but in law enforcement, if you don't have some kind of rank on your collar, you're not able to really get up to the chief's level and tell him, wait, I got a great idea. So I went to NAMI and I said, hey, the chief is going to be here at this legislative breakfast. It would be a really good opportunity if you wanted to ask him, maybe, if he had any thoughts about starting a mental health unit. I would love to know what his response would be. So really NAMI took, I'm glad I'm retired because I would get fired if he knew the truth. So NAMI took the lead on that and asked him in front of all the state representative and legislatures that were there, what his thought about starting a mental health unit was. And he looked over at me and he said, yes, we're going to go ahead and start a unit. In fact, Ernie's going to be the one that's going to be establishing this unit. And my heart almost sank. I was overwhelmed with joy, but I was also struck with fear because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So what I had to do, Dan, was I had to get out of the way of myself and really learn about mental health, humble myself and say, police officers don't know everything. I'll be the first one to tell you, now that I've accepted that fact, I'm ready to learn. So going through the learning process for years and responding to calls with a clinician with me really helped me learn and understand what the community expects from a response, but also all the different resources that are available within the community. Why do clinicians ask some of the questions they ask? Why do they ask about weight loss and shadows? like things I would have never asked just as a patrolman. I was learning how to speak the language of mental health. And I think that really was the key to having a successful unit, was being one of the first ones there and being able to take on new officers onto the unit and say, this is how to do it. We learn from the experts because we don't know it all. And that's just how I taught the class moving forward.
That's fantastic. Joe, talk about your engagement, your initial engagement with the mental health unit in terms of when and what did you see? And then the follow-on is, as veterans return and they're looking to go into law enforcement, what's your counsel to them? So really 2 questions.
Yeah, which that second one is fantastic that I've not been asked, Dan. We've done this for a couple of years, and so we get a lot of the same questions, and so well done to you for asking a brand new one. So when they started, it was a pilot program. They had a 6 months run. The data proved that, yeah, this is necessary. So then it became a unit. I applied. I was fortunate to be selected as one of the original 4. And I'll be honest, my first 2 years, I was a total hypocrite. Like I think a lot of police officers are. We show up every day on a mental health unit or as a patrol officer, and we give people counsel. We provide advice. We tell people what they should do, where they should go to the doctor, they should take their medication. And I myself did this for 2 years. And yet I would go home. I was going through my second divorce, and I was contemplating suicide all simultaneously. And I realized that I was not the person that should be helping other people. And I finally got to the place where I would say one of my several rock bottoms. And as my wife was leaving me and taking the kids, she said, "Hey, something's seriously wrong with you. You should go get help." I went to the VA, and the rest is history. I'm still engaged in the VA now, almost 12 years later. I've never left. And I have a diagnosis of PTSD and persistent depressive disorder, and I'm service-connected disabled through the VA. What I realized, Dan, was super valuable to me is the moment I was willing to start helping myself, I became better at helping other people. Now, I know there's a lot of varying beliefs and opinions out there about, boundaries, and should officers be helping people, or should they be open about helping themselves? But I wholeheartedly believe, and again, back to the ACEs score, your story resonated with me as well. I toured a federal facility, West Virginia, in December. It was a life-altering experience for me. And my ACE score is a 9. And I remember, and I also got to go inside of a female facility at the prison and a men's max. And I learned a lot that day, but I left there with this like massive clarity about, one, how it was just very evident that the war on drugs didn't work, that all we did was criminalize human behavior. Addiction is a behavior problem. It's not a crime. We filled our jails with people that have behavioral health issues, and we know that that's not effective for their treatment. But I left there thinking, imagine if we lived in a world where if you had an extramarital affair, you got a 15-year sentence. Or imagine where if you had a child out of wedlock, which I could argue is dangerous if we look at things through a public health lens. A lot of the mothers or a lot of the women that were in prison were mothers. And they tell me that they would have to call home every day at about 3:30 or 4 o'clock to try and do homework with their children. And if we understand the intergenerational transmission of household dysfunction, and we understand exactly to your point that you have 2 generations inside that jail, it's eye-opening. And again, I fully can appreciate now where Jen McShane's heart is in this work, from how she went from the prison to us, and that synergy there. It just makes sense. To your final point, specific to veterans, again, I think it's so important that, I've heard both sides of this argument of especially combat deployed veterans should not get into policing. If they have a PTSD diagnosis, they should not get into policing. And it's such a hard thing to give a blanket answer to, because all things in human behavior, there is no guarantee. I like to say that people are people are people, and people will do people things. And what that means is we have no idea. There are people who can be diagnosed with a mental illness and stay engaged in treatment and thrive. And then there are people who can be diagnosed with a mental illness and really struggle. And to be able to accurately predict which person is going to do which thing, I think is impossible. I really think it's, again, directly related to their willingness to stay engaged. First of all, be aware of it, but second of all, actually pursue healing and processing and not avoiding, because we know that's the staple trait for any trauma is avoidance. And so if we can actually pursue that and get to a place of healing, then I think that we have an incredible opportunity to help people. And again, how different are we really, right? I think we put these really unrealistic expectations on our first responders to be these like perfect emotionless humans, but we know that's not reality. And police officers are people too, and they have their own struggles. And so I think having someone that has that level of introspection and awareness, that is willing to own their story, own their struggle, admit to like what they've done to actually deal with it, to help other people. And finally, Dan, I'll end with this. I've been told several times over the last decade that I should go be a therapist. Joe, you should go be a therapist, be a therapist. And I wholeheartedly resist it because I don't like the rules. I don't like the boundaries of not being able to share your experiences. And in therapy, there's an expectation that you're going to keep it about the client. You're not going to talk too much about yourself. Not that I love talking about myself. It is a little awkward, but I've realized the power in finding that relatability and connection when we're willing to lead with our story. And we can humanize that interaction by saying, hey, I too have struggled. I too have been through several divorces. I too had an addiction at one point. And when you can find that common ground, I think, again, it really provides a beautiful opportunity for people to come together and realize they have far more in common than not.
You know what? Thank you very much. In you sharing your story, you shared your strength, and some may call it vulnerability. I would say that you're sharing your story, and in that story, there's strength and there's commonality with other humans and the human experience. So thank you for doing that, because there's so much strength in you doing that. So keep doing it. And Ernie, I want to come back to you and. You're going to IACP next week, and that for our audience, that's the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference. And there is the talk about, as the president spoke at his State of the Union, about fund the police, fund the police. There's nothing here about not funding the police, but I would tell you that in the mental health space, if you want to know what a community, and Jennifer talked about community and it being about community, and we talk about community too, but if you want to know what's important to a community, or if you want to know what someone cares about, follow the money. So where I'm going with this is that it's not about defunding, it's about looking at allocations of funding. So what have you seen in terms of where the funding has been going in the past? And next week, if you're asked the question about funding or defunding or refunding, what would you say to the chiefs of police in terms of, hey, let's follow the money. Let's look at what you really care about. How would you kind of address that kind of open-ended whiteboarding statement from leaders called chiefs of police?
So Joe's going to be the one going to IACP next week. So I'll defer the question to him. But on the back end of that, I would love to be able to talk to you about program development here. And you're right, follow the money. And where do you get your bang for your buck? And what we're doing here to build these sustainable programs to ensure that even past COVID money, there's going to be programs in place that help the community. And it's not one of these shell games where you're just moving money from, underneath this shell over here. And like you do with personnel, in order to build these specialized units, we're building sustainable units integrated with systems of care, mobile integrated health to address some of these problems. But to your question about IACP, I'll defer to Joe.
Thank you, Ernie. Joe?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Dan, and it's like music to my ears, because I'll tell you, as a business owner who's left the police department, that was something after the very tragic and unfortunate killing of George Floyd. Suddenly, a bunch of police departments found money in their cushions. And so then they realized there was, oh, we should probably do some training, which we've known. And again, this isn't always popular within police departments, but I really believe that most police agencies are about 1 to 2 decades behind the communities they operate in. I think societies evolve rather quickly, but because of the I guess order of operations with any police agency, the people who run police academies that have 15 to 20 years on, they revert back to the way things were when they went through as cadets, and then. But I also think that we need to take a really hard look. And I'm not always popular for saying things that I feel, but I think the communities are demanding that we have great change. And we know that in order for us to take great change, we have to actually do things differently. I think raising the minimum age requirement for police should be 25 years old. I think that you should either have to have a 4-year college degree, or you should have to have 2 years of working in social services, where you can learn to develop compassion before you get a gun belt. And I think that there should be standardization across the board when it comes to training. It blows my mind that any American citizen that calls 911 has the same exact expectation. Yet the police officers they get based on where they're geographically located is vastly different. Some police officers go through 10 weeks of training. Some go through 35 weeks of training. Some officers are getting paid $30,000. Some are getting paid $90,000. And I think that if we really want things to look different, we have to raise the standards significantly, because we have such a low barrier of entry to get into this profession, which has incredible responsibility with zero mistake game. And so if that's going to be the expectation, and it should be, I think we have to look at collectively raising the bar of how to get in, because right now it's just far too easy. And again, when I speak at IACP next week, the whole point of it is going to be talking specific about wellness, but saying, let's not just look at suicide, which yes, the suicide is very important. And I'm very happy that the FBI is finally employed through CGIS. They're going to have a suicide collection data task force. And then the first report's going to be out in the middle of this year, which I'm looking forward to. But I already know that we have 27 for this year. Just this year already, we're at 27, and it's unacceptable. But we can't sit back and wait for one to happen before we do things. We have to be active. We have to be proactive, which I think it's not proactive. It's all reactive at this point. But we have to be willing to do hard things. And again, I think things like mandating therapy for all officers throughout their entire career, and that includes the chief. I think we should look at things like that provides the opportunity for the officers who are suffering to make an outcry. And so that's what I'll be talking about next week.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to get to the point of wrapping up. I want to ask a few questions, and I apologize. I think some of these that I've been asking are the questions that our audience had, but there was no way I could delineate one from the other. So I decided to keep going with these. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about is there a role for peers in mental health units?
Yes, big time. And I'll tell you, one of the programs that we have here in San Antonio, it's called the SMART, the sheriff's version of a multidisciplinary response team, right? So we pair a deputy with a mental health clinician and a paramedic to respond to a 911 call for crisis, right? During that assessment, right, the officer knows their role. Their role is just to provide safety and then be quiet and get out of the way and let the professional come in, the social worker, come in and really do the assessment. The paramedic gets to touch the patient as well to make sure that you're not dealing with a medical emergency. What's important about that is on the back side of this team is a follow-up clinician and a peer specialist. So to be able to provide these type of wraparound services, saying, hey, the clinician came out last night, you're suffering with addiction and depression. That clinician refers it to the follow-up clinician who comes out with the peer specialist, who's able now to start linking that patient into services. And then having that peer specialist saying, look, I've been there. The clinician knows where to take you and what door to take you in, but I've been in that door. I know what goes on inside the facility, and I'll even help you walk out the back door when you go through your recovery. So I think peer specialists are fundamentally key when you're building these type of multidisciplinary programs.
That's outstanding. Thank you very much for that. What advice do you have for individuals or family members with a mental illness or who have had trauma with police to prevent a bad situation when interacting with police before the crisis?
Yeah, I would say it's just like marital advice. You should never try and solve a problem during the problem. So if you've had a negative experience in the past with police, I think, and this is why, again, another benefit of CIT training is if you do the lived experiences panel and you have people with lived experiences coming in, the reason that's so valuable is because it's important that the officers are able to have an interaction with people that have a mental illness while they're not in crisis, so that they can remember, like, oh, these aren't just frustrating calls or someone that's unpredictable and whatever. It'll, again, it's a reminder that they are people, and that just because you deal with them when they're in crisis doesn't mean that they don't also have good days. So I would recommend going to the local precinct or substation and asking. You'd be surprised at how open and welcoming most police agencies are going to be. And if you're a parent or a sibling or a loved one with a family member with a mental illness, I would walk them there when they're doing well or they're stable and say, hey, I would like to introduce my family member to the police department, and allow them to like build that relationship pre-crisis, so that, again, there's some level of understanding when and if they're ever in crisis or they destabilize and that interaction is had. To me, I think we have to look at truly kind of beginning relationships within police departments with our community, and not just seeing them as a nuisance or as offenders, but really, again, imagining what it would look like if we just saw them as friends and neighbors.
Reimagine crisis response. So I have another question for you all. What can NAMI affiliates and NAMI organizations do to ensure quality CIT programs?
I know for us in San Antonio, we involve NAMI from the very get-go. We bring them out, we let the family members talk and share their experiences about police response or about living with someone that has a mental illness. And to be honest with you, and I've shared this story before, but for those who haven't heard it, it was a NAMI member. I'm guilty, right? I came to CIT training when I did not want to. I was forced to go. I got signed up on my day off. But these things don't happen by accident, right? So while I'm in the training, a NAMI member came to talk about her adult son with mental illness. And she was very frank with us and said, look, one day one of you officers will show up at my house and he is going to scare you. He's very violent. He does not like the police. And you might end up shooting and killing my son. But then she said something else. She followed it up with this statement. She said, and that's okay, because I'm sure you have a family to go home to, and I want you to be safe. So when she said this, I went up to her after the presentation and I said, how could you say something like that to a group of police officers? I mean, I'm a parent and I could never say that it's okay. And then she looked me in the eye. She goes, well, what are you going to do about it? And she challenged me. And I thought for a moment, I don't know, but I'm going to do something. So the point to your question, show up. NAMI, show up, because you never know whose life you're going to change. You changed my life. You changed my career path completely. You changed a skeptic, and you changed somebody that was very ignorant to the world of mental health. You did that for me. And in return, I give myself back to you with my service to community. So just keep showing up and doing what you do.
Thank you very much, Ernie. We have we have several questions, and let me tell the audience here that we can't get to all of them. You know that, but as we get close to the wrap, let me ask this one. The question for Joe and Ernie. I'm currently part of a team here in Seattle that is creating a new mental health arrest diversion training program for Seattle Police. Members of NAMI Seattle and Disability Rights Washington are also involved, along with legal professionals. Not sure if you can, but this is the question. What misdemeanor charges do you believe should not be eligible for mental health arrest diversion, and why? What misdemeanor charges do you believe should not be eligible for mental health arrest diversion, and why?
So we have, right, Joe, we've got jail diversion here in San Antonio. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the only two misdemeanors that you shall still arrest on is a DWI charge or an assault family violence charge. Other than that, I believe all property crimes, anything else of a misdemeanor nature qualifies for a jail diversion. Did I miss something, Joe?
No, those are the two. And I would just add, though, that I don't think that it should just be blanket either, though. I think that while those are two to like start, I think there still should be some discretion. And because I think even some felonies, especially if it's an escalated charge, but misdemeanors, if someone is simply symptomatic of their mental illness that is untreated, I think that there should at least be someone taking an honest look and saying that, like, yes, this thing did happen and it's a byproduct of their untreated mental illness. And so we're going to at least create an opportunity to get them treatment first. I mean, again, we've created the problem that exists. Everyone knows the jails are overloaded with people with a mental illness. And so we have to be willing to look at treatment as an option first. And then again, if it doesn't work, then we try the other system. But I think we need to give people a chance. And I think we need to give people a benefit of the doubt. And one thing too, Dan, is this is unfortunate, but on our unit, when we were where it is right now, it falls under the fusion center. Sometimes it was actually better for the individual to have charges put on them because it would provide the system, the criminal justice system or the specialty courts leverage in ensuring their medication compliance, treatment compliance.
Yep.
Whereas if they're left on their own autonomy, they're not going to engage in treatment. And so sometimes we would put charges, if they were justified, on people, but still to help them. And that sucks. That's an unfortunate part of the system, is that sometimes people will get better treatment but they have to catch a charge for it to happen, which is unfortunate.
Got it. Thank you all. And Jennifer, I want to give you the closing comment as we get to this last minute. NAMI was started in 1979 by two moms, and just, as we matriculated through, and this being our 43rd year, it's all about caring and trying to do the best. What is the closing thought you'd like to give our audience? And to Ernie and Joe, thank you so very much. But what's the closing thought you'd like to give our audience, Jennifer?
Well, I can't think of a better place to share this experience than NAMI on a national level. So I want to thank you and thank all the chapters that are on. I guess I would say, first of all, I think it's so fitting that it was two moms. I'm sorry, moms are, most moms really are all about love and rock stars, and they'll do anything for their loved ones. And, so I would just say that I think you have a huge ability to make a change, even if it seems small and modest, and kind of what Ernie was talking about with NAMI. So I would welcome the opportunity to have as many people use this film as a conversation starter in their community. And everyone on this will see the film. They're going to get an offer for discounted opportunity to use the film. The film is made available at no cost to any law enforcement in the US. So what I would say is, think about reaching out to first responders in your community and law enforcement and say, let's work together. Let's do a community screening. And I'm just going to leave with one short anecdote. A police chief up in Maine hosted a screening, and he has been so moving in his retelling to me of what he's learned about his own community in terms of resources he didn't realize were there and ways that he can help. And he feels like he's a much better police chief now. And I've had these conversations with officers, with people who have been in crisis, with loved ones. Weekly, I still get letters from people. So I guess I would leave it with saying that you have the power to make a difference and you're not forgotten. And we all should be in this together. This is not one person's problem. It's all of our problem. We all need to take care of each other. So I would leave it with that. And I would thank NAMI for all you're doing.
Well, thank you for actually creating this and working with the incredible talent of Ernie and Joe to bring this to us. So we appreciate it so much. And to all of our NAMI volunteers and affiliates and state offices and the leadership there, you guys are the change agents, and continue to do what you're doing. And we're just fortunate that we can be with you all on tonight. And we look forward to continuing this discussion. Help, not handcuffs, a day in the life. This is the beginning, not the end. And we're constructing constructing a quilt here, and it's going to take all of us and with different patches to put on that quilt with one common thread through it, and that is really addressing mental illness in America and seeing the change that we want to occur. So with that said, we're going to do a wrap. We thank everyone for your investment on this evening, and please stay tuned. We are going to be doing more of these. And thank you to Ernie, to Joe, and to Jennifer. We really appreciate you all giving your time on this evening, and more importantly, for your work, what you're doing. So everyone have a great close to your evening, and we thank you, and NAMI thanks you. Night now.
Thanks.